version. All right. So I'm Kiri. Today we're going to talk about writing strong cover letters. So if you have questions at any point, feel free to just put those in the chat. We should also have some time at the end as well.
Okay.
So for cover letters, they're always going to be one page. Whatever you're submitting for, you want to be concise. Depending on your writing style, how much information you have to include, you may not fill 100% of the page. You might. Um, Part of having a cover letter is truly having sort of a writing sample, especially if it's for a position that is going to have that as a more common requirement. It is just helpful to get a sense of kind of where people are at. So
I
really,
forgot about that. I forgot about that possibility actually. That someone's that they use it for a sample of your I didn't even think of
yeah.
that. Okay.
And right. And so that's why sometimes people have like very brief, cover letters. And so what I would say is like you don't want to have like half a page or less because at that point that's not really a cover letter. That's just like an
Mhm.
email or like see my resume for more information and that's not adding value.
Right.
Um, so yeah, really ultimately what you want to get across in your cover letter is kind of that introduction because you're not there to introduce yourself like you would be if it was an in-person interview or networking session or something. Why do you want to work at that company in that specific role? And then what are your kind of strongest qualifications for the position? So, if you talk to recruiters, it's all over the place, right? There are some people that very strongly value a cover letter, and that is a definitive reason why they might invite one person to interview and not someone else. They may require cover letters consistently for their roles. Other places, it might not be a requirement. It might be optional. So that could be something that could help you make it to that interview round if you have a sufficiently engaging letter. But you may not necessarily be penalized for not submitting it. And then there are some places where, they don't necessarily want it. Like it's not a requirement. They just want whatever basic information they're asking for because they personally don't find them as meaningful as recruiters. It's more information they have to review. And so you don't necessarily always know unless whatever they've specified as part of the application process of, is it required? Is it optional? What have you. So as you're kind of, applying to opportunities, working on your letter and things for each one, what kind of is your ultimate goal here? Like if you are really interested in a particular type of industry, work environment, what matters to you value wise? How does that connect with where you're looking? What kind of impact do you want to have? Because in any particular role, different organizations are going to focus on different things. So, being in finance, working in a university is going to be different than finance working on Wall Street or working on Edward Jones, right? So the content and tasks of your jobs may be similar, but those settings and things can certainly have an impact. So you always just want to go back to the job description. So what I would recommend is reading through and seeing what is standing out. So if there are particular themes where they keep talking about collaboration and teamwork, then that's clearly something they care about, right? If that is something that they've mentioned multiple times. Sometimes they're going to specify those qualifications in these are required and these are preferred. So same thing as you're kind of looking at where you fall with those. What have you already incorporated in your resume? What do you need more context to talk through? So, it's always a good idea to get feedback, whether that's from us, if you're making an appointment, you want me to review a document, I'm happy to do that. Or even sometimes if it's just having a friend or family member look it over to say, okay, are there any typos, issues in your writing that are jumping out at you? Because it's easy when you're in the weeds and doing a lot where you may not always realize, oh, you left out a word here or there. And, spell checkers, proofreaders are not always going to pick up every one of those. So, as I mentioned earlier, you may have things that you've already incorporated on your resume that you are also referencing on your cover letter. That is fine. You might have some things in your cover letter that don't really fit on your resume, but at the end of the day, they should complement each other. So, um, they should each have a little bit of distinction, but the core things are going to be in both places, right? So if there's a degree requirement, certification requirement, that's the type of thing you want to make sure is incorporated in both, because traditionally recruiters or hiring managers are going to look at the cover letter first, because that is sort of that introduction, like, why are you interested? For some folks, they may look at the resume first because they're just seeing, okay, do you have the right degree? Do you have the basic qualifications we're looking for? If so, now I'm going to go back and actually review your application in more detail, read your cover letter. But like, if you don't have a required degree, I'm not going to waste my time. So, it's just going to depend a little bit on that individual recruiting process. Um, while it may be very similar, so like if you're applying to, multiple paralegal jobs or financial analyst jobs, probably a lot of it's going to be the same. You can certainly incorporate a lot of the same information, your experiences, your qualifications, but you do want to make sure there's always a little bit of tailoring. So if they're mentioning specific software programs you know how to use, different focus areas to the role, why you're interested in that particular position. And I would kind of think of this as like a very formal email tone. You want it to be professional, but this is not like research paper writing. You don't want to be too conversational either. And at the end of the day, you just want to connect how your experiences and skills relate to the job description. Because sometimes there's information where it might be hard to pull from your resume, especially if you're somebody that maybe has done a little bit of a career shift. And so tying those kind of transferable skills together may be easier, or to kind of give more context than if I'm just looking at a resume and saying, okay, why is somebody applying to this role? That's not what I'm seeing at first glance from your past experience on your resume. You always want to make sure and express why you're interested in that job/organization. This could just be a sentence or two, but I would look at things like their kind of about us page on their website. So, do they have any, kind of information about like their mission as a company, their values? Have they had any recent initiatives? So, if they're really focused on sustainability efforts and that's something you care about, right, you could certainly mention that. Maybe you've had experience using their product or services. Um, Maybe you have a connection there. So if you're going to name drop people, I would generally give them a heads up. Or if it's a situation where, maybe you connected with somebody at an event and they mentioned this opening. So, you were really intrigued, right? That's totally fine to include if relevant. And you want to think about how you can show the employer what you can do for them. Because sometimes folks are a little bit more focused on, well, this is how this job would be helpful for me. Like, I want to get more experience in this setting. I want to get my career started in this area. And, at the end of the day, we live in a capitalist society, right? And so they don't necessarily feel like, oh, yes, this is helpful for you. They care about what are you going to contribute. So just keep that in mind as you're writing. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it is genuinely an example of your writing skills. So if there are concerns because everything is in run-on sentences, it's very hard to read, that's something that might be important for some jobs, especially if it is more communication writing heavy. If it's a very blatant AI sounding letter, right? They may also draw some conclusions there about your writing skills if it doesn't actually feel like something you personally wrote. So in terms of kind of the format, this is going to be more of this block style format. So I'll show you an example in a couple of minutes, but really, not necessarily going to be like a research paper. You just want to make sure everything's left aligned. Single space is totally fine. So, you might have some space between paragraphs or something just for readability purposes, but, 1.5 double spacing is not necessary in this context. Um, Obviously, with one page, you are limited. So it is important to be concise, avoiding being repetitive as much as possible. You still want to keep all of those basic formatting things in mind. So, sort of 10 to 12 size font is typical, margins somewhere between half an inch to an inch. Because if it's, super tiny font and you've crammed all this information on a page, it doesn't really entice people to read it, nor does, having a short little paragraph that is not adding enough context. One of the biggest things that I see when I review cover letters is just making sure that you're actually providing details. Because if all you're doing is you're just rephrasing the bullet point on your resume, that again is not giving them extra. So if you're talking about course projects, work experience, volunteer experience, whatever is going to be most related to those job responsibilities, actually go into more detail than just saying I did X. And you just want to make sure that whether this is a hypothetical checklist or in reality one that actually exists, that recruiters can quickly check the box. So if they say, oh, we want somebody who has experience with this software program, they have had experience doing these types of tasks, between your resume and your cover letter, you want them to be able to confidently check that box. Because sometimes you might know you're qualified, but for somebody else, they might say, well, maybe they've done something similar, I'm not totally sure. And if somebody else has really done a good job of clearly stating that, they're going to kind of move up on the list. Just basic, writing practices, avoid starting everything with I. It's really easy to do this when you're just talking about yourself, but it is very boring to read. I did this, I did that, then I did this. So, use those transitions. You can flip sentence clauses around. So, as a recent graduate of Webster University, I completed my degree in XYZ, right? So, just kind of think through that. As I said, obviously make sure you proofread, have somebody else look at, because again, I've had many instances of some unfortunate phrasing that, word or grammarly didn't catch because it was a real word that you used. It just maybe was not the word you intended. Don't talk yourself out of a job. So this is something else that I tend to see if maybe you're a little bit underqualified, you meet a good chunk of the qualifications, but not quite everything. Just talk about what you have done. If you don't have this specific certification and that's a, preference for them, you don't need to say, I don't have the certification. Just, it's not listed on your resume, so they're going to assume that you don't have it. Or if it is something in progress, then you could choose to list that if you want. To say, oh, I'm currently working on my SHRM certification and sitting for the exam next month. So if that actually feels like you are in progress, making a concerted effort that you would be able to talk about, then you can mention it, but otherwise don't say, well, I only have 2 years of experience, instead of like, it just takes you out of it. I would also avoid just anything negative. So if you are in a situation where, you're looking for a new opportunity because you got laid off, you're making a career shift because you got really burned out as a teacher and you want to do something else. These are all very normal things, but don't focus on what was bad about this and why that prompted the change. Focus on what you want to do. So instead of saying, oh, it was so challenging having to deal with all of these things, talk about why you're excited to go into this new area, right? So kind of keep that positive emphasis. Um, Sometimes people find it challenging to write cover letters because they feel like it maybe comes across as more arrogant, or they, feel like it feels maybe a little bit, you know, more assertive. It feels a little weird to talk yourself up like you're the best possible candidate for this job when you don't know who else has applied to this job. So really, I think the biggest thing in tone is when things are comparison based. So if you're saying, I'm the best fit for this position, I was the best salesperson at my company, that feels a little bit more arrogant potentially because you're comparing yourself to others, whether or not that's a founded comparison. So think about it more as kind of a factual way. So, like if you were salesperson of the year, then state that, right? Because that is an objective category to show that you have that prowess without kind of emphasizing that other people are worse than you, if that makes sense. Um, just think about the fact that if you don't talk about what you're good at, what you have to offer, nobody else is going to do that for you. So it's not bragging to say these are things you've done and accomplished. And the person who is reading your document and is making that hiring decision, they can make the choice of where do you fit in the candidate pool, right? If you have way more experience than everybody else, if you're kind of on par, maybe you're a little bit underqualified because again, you just don't know who else is in there at the end of the day. So for typical order of information in your letter, you always want to have your contact information at the top. You can either do this the same as your resume header, or you can just do that kind of left block alignment. So at a minimum, always have your phone number, email, name. It's typical to include your location. In this day and age, if you choose not to list 123 Main Street, no one is mailing you anything. It's not really the end of the world. It's just still kind of traditional to list that. You want to include the date that you're actually submitting your application. And then again, it is still somewhat traditional to include contact information for the organization you're applying to. So this is not really the end of the world if you are tight on space. If you are applying to a really big company, it may not be clear where this is located or which of the like 10 different offices in the area this job would be at. You can list kind of whatever that general address is for the organization. Sometimes they might include information in the job posting, but nobody is probably really going to ding you for not including it, right? It's just more a function of this is the way people have done it in the past than they're actually mailing information or it's useful in that sense. So for whatever greeting, you just want to make sure you're getting the title right as much as possible, especially if you know who to address it to. So in some job applications, they may actually specify, who this is for. Sometimes you may be able to do a little bit of online research and figure it out. If it's a local nonprofit, you can probably go to their website page and see here's the director of the nonprofit because there's 10 employees, right? That is pretty easy to figure out. If it's a law firm and same thing, there's a handful of people there, there's directory. You can easily find that information on LinkedIn or something. Great, then use that. If you are not sure if it's a really big company, they don't specify anything in the job description, I wouldn't stress too much about, trying to contact HR to find the right person or something, because they may or may not specify anyways if you get a hold of someone. So if you do know who it is, Just make sure you are spelling their name correctly and gendering them appropriately. Because I will tell you, as someone with a not super common name, I have had all types of spelling when my email is right above what they're sending to me. I've had people just straight up call me a different name, and so they'll address it to Kelly, they'll call me sir, things like that. It's not the end of the world. I don't get super offended, but it's just not a great way to make a first impression, right? So if you are not clear if Robin is male or female or non-binary, I would just list their full name. So just, put Robin Lockwood. If you don't know if they're a Mr. or Mrs. or Miss or whatever it might be. If they have a like honorific, or they're a doctor, something like that, then I would go ahead and include that. So you could say, dear Dr. Lockwood, if you see that they have their PhD as part of their information or bio. Sometimes you might know the title, so you might address it to the principal of a school, even if you aren't able to figure out who is the actual human being. If you don't know, just use something like dear hiring manager, dear hiring committee. Phrasing like dear sir, ma'am, to whom it may concern. While not technically wrong, it just feels very outdated. That was kind of a convention for a long time, so I would just try to avoid those when possible. In terms of the actual content, so that first paragraph, you want to get across, who are you? So whatever those most important qualifications are. Like if you have to have a required degree, right? If you're a recent graduate, specify that in that first paragraph. If you have a, certification that they're looking for, any kind of overview. So if you talk about having 5 years of experience in the banking industry, something like that, that's kind of what you want to focus on. And then what are you applying for? So make sure you specifying, the degree title, because again, for some companies, they're going to have multiple openings. They may have multiple grant writing positions open in different departments. So, you know, even though you're applying online, still make sure that that is specified in the letter for which position it is. And then, as I mentioned a little bit ago, if you have a referral, if maybe you know somebody at the company and they mentioned the opportunity, you can certainly name drop as appropriate to say that's why you were interested in the opportunity or heard about it. If you're just found it online, right, then you don't need to address that. This is also where you want to include why you're interested. So again, it might just be a sentence or two, but it is a really great way up front to get their interest, to show that you know a little something about the organization, that it was intentional, because sometimes as a hiring manager, you get these applications and you have no clue why this person applied. Like their experience doesn't necessarily line up with a traditional profile. They haven't said like, oh, I'm really wanting to, get into this area. This is why I'm making a career shift. And sometimes you just wonder, did you click on the wrong thing? Are you just applying because it's a requirement for unemployment that you apply to a certain number of jobs, even if it's not actually related or what you're interested in? So make sure you're specifying that. And then the middle section, this is just going to depend on what makes sense to you and what you want to talk about. So sometimes you might find kind of natural themes. So maybe you have one paragraph that's talking more about your like technical skills and one paragraph that is talking more about your kind of interpersonal skills, your academic qualifications. Sometimes you just might find a good natural breaking point in your writing. So you might have one paragraph, you might have two or three shorter paragraphs, whatever you feel like is just going to help in terms of readability. Because if you just have this one giant chunk, right, that is not useful as people are skimming. So just kind of feel out where those natural breakpoints are. And again, between your resume and your cover letter, what things can you go into more detail with? Because sometimes it is easier to emphasize those themes of maybe you're talking about, your grant writing skills, and that's something that you took a course in and you helped out with a local nonprofit and did something, right? So maybe you're kind of pulling from different experiences to show that you have this knowledge set or skill. So sometimes that is just easier to do than on a resume where you're listing by very specific categories. And again, just make sure you're kind of going into adequate detail. For the last paragraph, this is kind of the fluff, thanks for your time. I look forward to hearing from you. Here's how you can contact me. So it does not need to be very long, but just include that basic information. Because again, if they are reading your cover letter and they're interested in interviewing you, you don't want to have to make them go back and look for that information and see, oh, okay, I've got to pull you up in ADP and find your phone number to give you a call and see what time works for interview, right? You just want it to be right there for them. Some of this is a little bit personality based. So sometimes people might be a little bit more or less assertive about, I love the opportunity to interview. I will follow up in this time frame. That is just a personal preference at the end of the day. If you say that you are going to do something, you need to do it. If you say you're going to follow up with something and you don't, it just looks bad, right? That you bothered to say that and didn't follow through with it. If you are in a sales job, probably they are going to be a little bit more appreciative of you being persistent or asking for an interview. If you do that for a teaching application, they might feel like you're being a little over aggressive or over assertive. So just keep that in mind. I would say in general, you don't need to include that or say, yes, I'd love to schedule an interview because, it's their call at the end of the day. And also, they know that you want that because that's why you're applying. So I would just focus more on here's how to contact me if you have further questions. Look forward to hearing from you. That's fine. This is also where you can sort of restate your thesis or case, as it were. So, between my 10 years of experience in this area, with your academic qualifications and experience with this, I think I would be a great fit. I'd love the opportunity to discuss more. So that's also kind of circumstances where you can re-emphasize whatever those strongest qualifications for as they're wrapping up your document. And then just have whatever closing. If you have like a digital signature, you can include that. Some people will just type their name. Some people will use like a more kind of curly font. It's up to you. What I would avoid is, if you sign it and then you're scanning it in or you're having like a image that is going to look a little bit pixelated, I think it's better to just type out your name. But again, if you have like a nice digital signature, it looks good. You can certainly do that if you want to. Nobody is mailing anything anymore, so it's not like it has to have that actual formal signature. So these are just a couple of examples of what it might look like. So for this one, this is the same header as they have on their resume. And then you can kind of see that left alignment of, the date, who they're sending it to, kind of focusing on here's some information about why they're interested, their experience is relevant. This fake one, a little bit more content, right? So there's somebody that has a little bit more experience. They've talked about that. This would be that kind of old school format with your information, the date, their information at the top. So again, everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some people are a little wordier than others. So as long as you're addressing the key points, that's what matters. And the rest of it is a little bit more of that personal style. So like in this example, they kind of broke up talking about their experiences within their two main relevant roles. So there's always plenty of ways to kind of organize that middle content where you're talking about your qualifications. So there's obviously tons of different, AI programs out there. Some people are more or less comfortable using those things. Um, if that's a choice that you make and you want to use AI to say, hey, here's this job posting, here's my information, what qualifications feel like I'm missing, what's most relevant. If you're having a hard time coming up with kind of wording for something and you want to look at different examples, that might be an appropriate use of that. I would very strongly avoid using AI to just generate a cover letter. Like, here's the job description, here's my resume, please write me a cover letter for this job. At this point, there's not always a clear, you can 100% say this was obviously generated by ChatGPT or not or something, but there are just feelings you have, especially if you're somebody that you're reading a lot of application materials on a regular basis. Um, there are just certain hallmarks in the writing style where you can feel it feels like it most likely was AI generated. Some applicant tracking systems do have a feature, like if that's something they care about. Some of them have those checkers, which again may not be 100% accurate, but might flag you if it seems pretty blatant. And again, a lot of times AI written things are just very wordy and they sort of sound professional, but there's no actual content. And so that's often an indicator for me where I'm like, well, you're sort of talking around your interest or qualifications and you're not really specifying, oh, in this position, I, did X, Y, Z. I was able to do a deep dive on this. So it just doesn't feel useful. So at that point, if it's not a requirement, I don't think that is helping in the long run. So as with anything else, it's a tool, it's out there, but use your brain to at least have a starting point. Because at the end of the day, it's useful if it is actually true to your experience and authentic. Because if it is just generating stuff and it potentially is hallucinating experiences or certifications or something, and then you don't really proofread strongly, somebody asks you about that, right? Again, it's just a way that you are not going to make a positive impression. And then in terms of actually submitting, the vast majority of the time, you are just going to upload it as a separate file. So they will just have a slot for here's, if a cover letter, if it's a requirement, here's a file upload for your resume. Sometimes there may be only one slot, or it might be optional to submit a cover letter. They don't specify whether they want one. It's just a resume. So if you feel like I think this would help people have extra context about me and my qualifications, then just combine them into like one PDF and you would have your cover letter first because that's that kind of introductory document. Um, Again, unless they're specifying something else in the application, PDF is usually the best because that is going to have preserved your formatting choices. And if it's a really small organization, like if it's a small nonprofit or a small law firm and there's, 4 employees, they may just ask you to email your application to somebody. So in that case, don't put the cover letter in the email. It is better to attach it, whether it's a separate document or together with your resume. But then in the email message, just include a very brief, I'm applying to XYZ. You can find these things attached. I'm really interested. Here's how you can contact me if you have further questions. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to schedule an appointment to kind of go through a draft, talk through things, we're always happy to do that. And otherwise, if you have any questions, you can go ahead and let me know.